On their 5th wedding anniversary, Marina Vale wore red, the color of hope, of trying one last time. She walked into that candlelit rooftop expecting an apology. What she got instead was her husband walking through the door with another woman on his arm, laughing like Marina was already dead. He called her dead weight in front of every crime family guest in the room. He said he only married her for her father's ports. And then the room went completely silent, because at the head table, Matteo Sorrento was already watching her, not with pity, with something far more dangerous. If you want to see what a woman does when humiliation becomes her weapon, stay until the end, hit like, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. Shunt. The elevator doors opened at 9:04 p.m., and Marina Vale stepped out onto the rooftop of Castello Noir, already knowing something was wrong. She couldn't name it yet. It was just a pressure behind her sternum, the kind of sensation she'd spent 5 years learning to ignore. That low-frequency warning her body sent when Julian was about to do something that would require her to smile through it afterward. She'd gotten very good at smiling through things. It was practically a skill set at this point. The rooftop was everything Julian had promised when he'd texted her the reservation 3 days ago. 40 stories above the city, draped in black linen and candlelight, the kind of venue that cost more per table than most people's monthly rent. Gardenias floated in crystal bowls. A string quartet worked quietly in the corner, their notes dissolving into the warm evening air. The skyline of the city stretched out behind them like something from a film, all glass and light, and the suggestion of infinite possibility. Marina stood at the threshold and let herself have exactly 4 seconds of hope. She was wearing the burgundy dress Julian had brought back from Milan 2 Christmases ago, the one he'd said made her look like a painting. She'd had her hair done. She'd put on the earrings his mother had given her at their wedding, the diamond drops that caught light in a way that made her feel, if only briefly, like someone worth looking at. She'd done all the things a woman does when she is trying to hold a marriage together with her bare hands and no instruction manual and very little sleep. 4 seconds. Then she clocked the room. It was a private event. She understood that much. Julian had said it was a family dinner, that the anniversary reservation had been arranged to coincide with the Sorrento gathering, that it would be good for her to be seen. She'd pushed back on that, mildly, the way she always pushed back on Julian's decisions, with just enough resistance to feel like she had a spine, but not enough to actually change anything. He'd given her that look, the one that said she was being difficult, and she'd let it go. So she knew there would be Sorrento people here. What she hadn't expected was the weight of them, the particular density of dangerous men arranged around a space, the way the air in a room changed when the people in it were accustomed to being obeyed. She'd grown up adjacent to this world, her father a shipping magnate whose legitimate empire ran alongside less legitimate ones, so she wasn't naive. But 5 years of Julian had made her soft in ways she hadn't noticed until this moment, standing at the edge of a room full of wolves and realizing she'd forgotten how to read them. She spotted the head table immediately. It was impossible not to. It occupied the northwest corner of the rooftop, slightly elevated, positioned so that whoever sat there could see everything and everyone. 3 men sat there with the stillness of people who had never needed to perform power because they'd always simply had it. And at the center of those 3 men sat Matteo Sorrento. She'd seen him before, twice, at events she'd attended on Julian's arm. She'd been introduced to him once, briefly, in a marble foyer somewhere, and he'd shaken her hand with the economy of a man who took a measurement in the time it took most people to say hello. She remembered thinking he looked like a weapon that someone had bothered to dress well. He was looking at her now, not the way men looked at women in red dresses, not with that particular flicker of assessment that she'd been navigating her entire adult life. He was looking at her the way a chess player looks at a piece that just appeared on the board from an unexpected angle, with calculation and something close to curiosity. Marina looked away first. She always looked away first. She found a waiter, accepted a glass of white wine she didn't want, and positioned herself near the edge of the rooftop railing to wait for Julian. He'd texted 40 minutes ago to say he was on his way. He was always on his way. Julian Sorrento existed in a perpetual state of almost arriving, almost delivering, almost being the husband she had convinced herself he could become. She looked out at the city and drank her wine and told herself tonight would be different. At 9:22 p.m., the elevator doors opened again. Julian walked out laughing. That was the first thing. The laugh. It was his social laugh. The one he deployed at parties and dinners, full-throated and practiced, designed to signal that he was the most relaxed person in any room. She knew that laugh the way she knew the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. She could distinguish it from his real laugh, which was quieter and happened less and less often the longer they were married. The second thing was the woman. She was blonde, which was almost a cliché, Marina thought distantly. Tall, late 20s, wearing something silver and structural that suggested both money and intent. Her hand was on Julian's arm with the ease of familiarity. Not the tentative grip of someone new to the position, but the settled ownership of a woman who had been holding that arm for long enough to stop thinking about it. The third thing was that Julian saw Marina immediately. She watched his eyes find her across the rooftop, and he did not stop laughing. That was the moment Marina understood that this was not an accident. The room had already begun to register the situation. She could feel it in her peripheral vision, the subtle recalibration of attention, faces turning with the practiced subtlety of people trained to observe without appearing to observe. 30, maybe 40 guests, and every single one of them knew what was happening. The string quartet played on because musicians at these events were paid to be furniture, but even the cellist's bow seemed to hesitate for a half beat. Marina did not move. She would think about this later, about the fact that her body simply refused to flee, refused to crumple, refused to do any of the things that 5 years of emotional erosion had theoretically prepared her for. She stood at the railing with her wine glass, and she watched her husband walk his mistress across the rooftop of Castello Noir, and she felt something inside her go very, very quiet. Not numb, quiet. There was a difference. Numbness was the absence of feeling. What Marina felt in that moment was the opposite. Every sensation sharpened to an almost unbearable clarity. The weight of the glass in her hand, the warmth of candle heat against her cheek, the faint sound of the city 40 stories below, the specific texture of humiliation as it settled into her chest like a stone dropped in still water. Julian stopped a few feet from her. The woman, the mistress. She was already the mistress in Marina's mind, a noun, a category, something to be processed rather than felt, stayed on his arm. "Marina!" Julian's voice was easy, conversational. He was using his party voice. "You made it." "I was invited," she said. Her own voice came out level. She was mildly surprised. "Right," he smiled. It was the smile of a man who has already decided how the evening will end and is simply getting through the preamble. "This is Kara. She's been helping me with the Geneva accounts." The Geneva accounts. Marina looked at Kara. Kara had the expression of someone trying to appear neutral about a situation she had been thoroughly briefed on. "I know who she is," Marina said. Julian's smile flickered. Not much, just enough. "Marina, how long?" She hadn't planned to ask that. The question came out on its own, the way things did when the part of her brain that managed appearances finally lost a hand. Julian's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the room, toward the other guests, toward the men at the head table, toward the specific audience he had, intentionally or not, assembled for this moment. And when he looked back at her, something in his expression had shifted. The easy performance was gone. What replaced it was something rawer and worse. "We can talk about this later," he said, low, clipped. "I'm asking now. Marina." His voice dropped another register, the one he used when he wanted her to understand she was being unreasonable. "This isn't the time. You brought her here." Marina set her wine glass down on the nearest surface, a waiter's tray. She didn't look. Her hand was steady. She was faintly impressed by that. "To our anniversary dinner, you brought her here. So either this is exactly the time or you're about to explain to me what kind of time it is." Something shifted in the room. She could feel it without seeing it, that collective holding of breath that happened when a scene moved from subtext to text. Julian stepped closer. He dropped his voice to something that was almost private, almost the voice he used when it was just the two of them, and he was trying to manage her. "You've been a liability for 2 years," he said. "You know that. Your father's ports are bleeding. His contracts are a mess, and the only reason anyone in this family has tolerated the Vale name is because I vouched for it, for you, and you have done nothing with that." Marina stared at him. "Say that louder," she said. "I don't think everyone heard you." He said it louder, not the exact words, as, Julian had always been strategic, even in his cruelties, but the shape of it, the architecture of it, the full intention of what he meant. Dead weight. That was the phrase he used. The room heard it. The string quartet heard it. The waiter with the abandoned wine glass heard it. The men at the head table heard it. "I married you for your father's business," Julian said, and his voice carried the particular confidence of a man who has decided the conversation is already over. That was the arrangement. Anyone who told you different was being kind. This, he gestured between them, a small dismissive motion that encompassed 5 years of her life, was always going to end. Marina's ears were ringing. Not from emotion. Or not only from emotion, it was a physical response. The body's refusal to process certain inputs at normal speed. She was aware, in a distant and almost academic way, that she was standing in the most humiliating moment of her adult life, and that she was about to do something, and that the something would determine, in front of every person in this room, exactly who Marina Vale was. She reached up and removed her anniversary ring. It was a 3-carat round-cut diamond in a platinum setting that Julian's family jeweler had designed. She'd worn it for 5 years without taking it off. It had been part of her hand. She removed it with the same deliberate care she might use to remove a thorn. She dropped it into Julian's wine glass. The sound it made was very small, a soft, precise clink of diamond against crystal. But the room heard it. Marina smoothed the front of her dress. "Good night, Julian," she said. She turned to walk away. She got 3 steps. "You leave this room," Julian's voice followed her, no longer controlled, no longer performing, the party voice completely gone now. "And I will make sure your father doesn't have a port to his name by the end of the month. I will burn every contract, every connection, every deal Vale Shipping has left. I will call in every favor, and I will make sure that family is finished. Don't test me, Marina. Not here." She stopped, turned back. Julian stood in the center of the rooftop with Kara still beside him, and he looked, in that moment, like a man who had just played his best card and knew it. Marina's father was 71 years old. He'd had a cardiac event 8 months ago. Minor, the doctor said, manageable. But she'd seen the way he'd aged afterward, the particular tiredness that had settled into his eyes. Vale Shipping was his life's work. It was also, she knew, struggling. The port contracts Julian had referenced weren't wrong. The margins had compressed. There were legal complications she only partially understood. If Julian moved against it with the full weight of Sorrento money and Sorrento connections. She understood, in the space of 3 seconds, the specific cage she had always been living in. She had simply not been looking at the bars. "You would do that," she said. "Not a question." "I would do that," Julian confirmed. The room was absolutely silent, and then, from the corner of the rooftop, from the head table, where Matteo Sorrento had been sitting without moving for the last 12 minutes, there was the sound of a chair being pushed back. The sound was not loud. It was almost nothing, really. The legs of a chair against a stone floor. Every person in the room turned. Matteo Sorrento stood. He was not a tall man. Julian had 2 inches on him, but height was an imprecise measurement of presence, and Matteo's presence was the kind that reorganized rooms around itself without effort. He was in his early 50s, dark-haired, going silver at the temples, built like someone who had never stopped using his hands, even after he'd had enough money to stop using them. He wore a suit the color of slate and no tie, and he was looking at Marina with an expression she couldn't read. He walked toward her, not toward Julian, toward her. The room reconfigured itself around his path, guests shifting back without appearing to shift back. The unconscious choreography of people who understood proximity to power as a physical reality. Even Julian went still. Marina watched it happen, watched the performance drain out of him as his uncle crossed the rooftop. Matteo stopped 2 feet from Marina. He looked at her for a moment that seemed to occupy more time than it actually took. His eyes were dark gray, she noticed. She'd forgotten that from the one time they'd met. Gray, not brown, and very steady. "Mrs. Sorrento," he said. "Vale," she corrected automatically. "Marina Vale." "For now," he said. She didn't know what to do with that. She looked at him. He looked back. Then he turned to Julian, and everything about his posture, his expression, the angle of his body, everything changed. "Julian." His voice was quiet. It was always quiet, she would learn. Men who had nothing to prove rarely needed volume. You're embarrassing yourself. Julian's jaw worked. Uncle, this is between me and your wife, Matteo said. Who you invited to your anniversary dinner, in my venue, with a woman who is not her. A pause. Sit down. Julian sat down. Kara sat down too, apparently by reflex. Matteo turned back to Marina. Whatever had just happened, the casual, devastating efficiency of it, he set aside completely, as if it had cost him nothing. Walk with me, he said. It wasn't a question, she would learn that too, but it also wasn't an order in the way Julian issued orders, with the implicit threat of consequence underneath. It was something else, an invitation in the structure of a command. Marina walked with him. He led her toward the far edge of the rooftop, away from the tables, away from Julian and Kara and the frozen string quartet and the 30-odd guests who were all absolutely pretending they weren't watching. The city spread out below them. The wind at this height had a different quality than wind at street level. Cleaner somehow, less interested in you. Matteo stood at the railing and looked at the skyline for a moment before he spoke. How much do you know about your husband's arrangement with the Cabrini partners? He asked. Marina frowned. The import subsidiary? The one he set up in your father's name without your father's knowledge. He said it without particular emphasis, as if it were simply information, offered cleanly. 18 months ago. The contracts are filed under a Veil Shipping LLC that doesn't appear in your father's records because Julian created it using documentation your father signed for a different purpose. The wind moved through Marina's hair. She was very still. He's been running product through your father's ports, Matteo continued, under your father's name. Your father doesn't know. You don't know. And if anyone in my family, or anyone in any family, wanted to make a problem for Veil Shipping, they would have enough documentation to do it tomorrow morning. Marina turned to look at him. Why are you telling me this? Because my nephew just threatened your father's livelihood in front of a room full of witnesses, Matteo said. And because you need to understand what you're actually inside before you decide how to walk out of it. She studied his profile. He was looking at the city. What do you want? She asked. He turned then, looked at her directly, the way he'd looked at her from the head table, with that quality of precise, unhurried attention. I want the Cabrini arrangement ended, he said. I want the documentation controlled. And I want Julian removed from a position where he can continue to make decisions that embarrass this family. That's what you want, Marina said. What does any of that have to do with me? Matteo was quiet for a moment. Julian created that subsidiary using Veil credentials, he said. The cleanest way to invalidate those credentials, to legally dissolve his access to them, is to change the controlling interest of the Veil family connection to this family. She heard what he wasn't saying before he said it. No, she said. I'm proposing a contract, Matteo said. Legal, binding, a marriage in name, in standing, and in the eyes of every family in this city. You become my wife. The Veil ports come under my direct protection. Julian's access to the ports, to the subsidiary, to the leverage he just threatened you with, is severed completely. You're proposing a business arrangement, Marina said. Her voice was very flat. At my anniversary dinner. I'm proposing a solution, Matteo said, to a problem that already existed before tonight. And what do I get? She heard the edge in her own voice, the specific edge of a woman who has been managed and maneuvered for long enough to recognize the shape of it even when it came in a different form. Beyond the protection, beyond the ports. What do I get, personally? Matteo looked at her steadily. Julian threatened your father in front of witnesses, he said. I am offering you the legal standing to make that threat meaningless. I am offering you a name that no one in this city or any other will challenge. And I am offering you... He paused, not for effect. She had the sense he was choosing a word carefully, the way men who were precise about language paused before they spoke. Recourse, against someone who has spent your marriage treating you as a commodity. The wind moved. Below them, the city made its constant noise, indifferent. Marina thought about her father, about his face after the cardiac event, the gray quality of his skin, the way he'd reached for her hand in the hospital, about the papers he'd signed that he hadn't known he was signing, about the LLC filed under his name that didn't exist in his records. She thought about Julian downstairs, with Kara's hand on his arm, telling her she was dead weight in front of a room full of people. She thought about the ring sitting at the bottom of a wine glass. "If I agree," she said. "This happens tonight?" "The contract can be signed before midnight," Matteo said. "We announce before this dinner ends." "And Julian will be handled." The words were simple, absolute. She understood they were not a euphemism for violence. Or not only for violence. They were a statement of jurisdiction. Julian was, in this moment, Matteo's problem to resolve. Marina looked at the skyline. She looked at her hands on the railing, the bare finger where the ring had been for 5 years. She looked at Matteo Sorrento, who had walked across a rooftop toward her when every other person in that room had frozen, and she tried to determine what he was. Not a rescuer. She knew better than that. She'd spent 5 years believing in rescuers, and she understood now, with the cold clarity of a woman who had just had her entire understanding of her own life revised in the space of 30 minutes, that rescuers did not exist. There were only people with interests, and people who were useful to people with interests, and the negotiations between them. Matteo Sorrento had interests. She was apparently useful to them, but so was he. "Yes," she said. The word came out steadier than she felt. Or perhaps she felt steadier than she thought. She was not entirely sure, in that moment, where the performance ended and the actual Marina Vale began. Matteo nodded once. The way he received her answers, without relief, without satisfaction, without any visible shift in expression, told her something about him. He had expected her to say yes, not with arrogance, but with the specific confidence of someone who had assessed a situation accurately before entering it. "We'll go back inside," he said. "I need a minute," Marina said. He looked at her. She looked back. "1 minute," he said, and stepped away. She turned back to the railing. 40 stories below, the city moved in its patterns. Cars, lights, the shapes of people made small by distance. She pressed her palms flat against the metal rail and breathed deliberately, the way she'd learned in the 6 months she'd spent seeing a therapist that Julian had eventually made her stop seeing because it made her, he said, too much in her own head. She thought, "Your father's ports." She thought, "An LLC filed in his name." She thought, "Dead weight." She thought, "You are about to marry a man you met twice, one of whom you will do later." She thought, "You are about to stop being Julian Sorrento's wife and become something else entirely." The wind picked up. The gardenias below were probably starting to wilt. The string quartet had started playing again, which meant the room was attempting to reassemble itself into something that resembled normalcy. Marina straightened her back, smoothed her dress, checked, automatically, with her thumb, the finger where her ring had been, and when she felt the absence, the bare cool of her own skin, she let her hand fall. She turned back toward the room. Matteo was waiting exactly where she'd left him, turned slightly toward the room, watching the space with the attention of someone monitoring a situation. He did not look at her when she returned to his side, but the angle of his body shifted, just barely, just enough to include her. They walked back toward the tables together. Julian saw them coming. The expression on his face was a thing Marina would remember for a long time. It moved through several stages in rapid succession: confusion, assessment, calculation, and then, underneath all of those, something she had rarely seen in 5 years of marriage. Fear. Not of her. She understood that. Of Matteo, of what Matteo's proximity to her meant, of the specific reconfiguration of power that two people walking side by side could represent. She let herself feel that for exactly 1 second. Then she sat down, at the head table, at the seat Matteo indicated with one hand, and she picked up a menu she had no intention of reading. Across the room, Julian was already reaching for his phone. Marina watched him and understood, with the particular certainty of a woman who has just made an irreversible decision, that the conversation he was about to have would not change anything. Matteo Sorrento sat beside her. He poured water into her glass without being asked. He did not speak. He did not perform. He simply existed in the space beside her with the complete self-possession of a man who had spent decades being the most dangerous person in any room and had long since stopped finding it interesting. Marina drank her water. Her hand did not shake. Across the room, Julian stood abruptly, knocking his chair back, his phone pressed to his ear, his face doing something complicated and frightened. Kara touched his arm. He shook her off. The waiter appeared at Marina's elbow. "Can I get you something, ma'am?" "Whatever he's having," Marina said, gesturing to Mateo's glass. Mateo glanced at her sideways. It was the first time all evening she'd seen something that might, in another man, in different light, have been the beginning of a smile. The string quartet played. The gardenias floated in their bowls. The city pressed its lights against the dark sky. And Julian Sorrento, Marina's husband of 5 years, stood at the edge of the room with his phone and his mistress and his diminishing hand, and tried to understand what had just happened to. Julian was still on his phone when the waiter brought Marina her drink. She didn't look at him. She'd made a decision, somewhere between the railing and the head table, that looking at Julian Sorrento was a thing she was going to do on her own terms from now on, not his. So she looked at her glass. Mateo was drinking sparkling water with a slice of lemon, which was not what she'd expected, and she let the room settle around her while her husband unraveled at the edges of it. Mateo said nothing. He had the quality of a man who understood that silence was not empty. He sat with the particular stillness of someone who had learned through years of being in rooms where the wrong word ended things, that stillness itself was a form of control. He did not check his phone. He did not scan the room with obvious intention. He simply sat beside her, and the room organized itself around that fact. "He's calling his lawyer," Marina said quietly. "He's calling Fen Caruso," Mateo said. "His lawyer uses Caruso as a fixer. Caruso will tell him to sit down." Marina turned to look at him. "How do you know who he's calling?" "Because it's what I would do," Mateo said. "And Julian learned everything he knows from watching me do it badly." She processed that. There was something in the phrasing, the blunt economy of it, the absence of any need to soften the assessment of his own nephew, that told her more about Mateo Sorrento than anything she'd observed in the last hour. Across the room, Julian ended the call. He stood very still for a moment, his back to the table, looking out at the city. Kara said something to him. He didn't respond. Marina watched the set of his shoulders. She knew the architecture of Julian's tension, the way you know the floor plan of a house you've lived in, the specific places where the weight settled. And she watched him make a decision. He turned. He walked toward the head table. He didn't walk fast. Julian never walked fast toward confrontations. He told her once that men who rush toward conflict announce themselves as reactive, and that reactive men were predictable. She'd thought at the time that it was wisdom. She understood now that it was theater. Everything with Julian was theater. She'd just been the audience long enough to mistake it for reality. He stopped at the edge of the head table. His eyes moved to Mateo first. They always moved to Mateo first, she noticed, even when he was trying to address her, and then settled on Marina with an expression that was working very hard to be controlled. "I'd like to speak with my wife," he said. "I'm not your wife," Marina said. "I mean that legally, as of 37 minutes ago." Julian's jaw tightened. "You haven't signed anything." "The contract is being prepared," Mateo said. He didn't look up from the table. "I'm talking to Marina." "I know." Mateo looked up then, just looked, didn't say anything else. Julian held eye contact for approximately 4 seconds. Marina counted. She'd learned to count the seconds of Julian's silences the way meteorologists tracked pressure drops, because what came after them mattered. He looked away first. Marina said, "Sit down, Julian." He looked at her like she'd slapped him. "Excuse me? You heard me." She kept her voice level. It took effort. Not because she was frightened, she wasn't, which was itself strange. She kept waiting for the fear to arrive, and it kept not arriving. But because the effort of not letting her hand shake was going somewhere, was occupying some part of her nervous system that might otherwise have expressed itself differently. "You've made your position clear, multiple times, in front of everyone in this room. I'm giving you the opportunity to sit down before you make it worse." Julian's nostrils flared. "You're giving me an opportunity." "Someone should." A muscle in his cheek moved. She'd seen that happen once before, the night he'd thrown a glass at the kitchen wall. Not at her. He'd always been precise about that. He threw things near her, not at her, because Julian understood the legal distinction even in his worst moments. "This is insane," he said. His voice had dropped. Private, almost. The way he got when he was deciding what kind of scene this was going to be. "You understand that. What you're doing is insane. You don't know anything about him." "I know what you are," she said. "That's enough to understand the difference." Julian laughed. It was the laugh of a man who is no longer performing but hasn't found what to replace the performance with. Raw, a little broken, and therefore, for the first time all evening, something Marina almost recognized as the person she'd once believed she'd married. "You think this is better?" He was still keeping his voice low. The restraint was costing him. She could see it in the tendons of his neck, the way his jaw was working. "Marina, listen to me. Whatever he told you out there, whatever arrangement he's proposing, you are not understanding what you are agreeing to. This isn't—" He stopped, looked at Matteo, then back at her. "He doesn't do things for free. Nothing he offers has a clean bottom line. You want to talk about cages? You want to talk about what it's like to be inside something you can't get out of?" "Julian," Matteo said, "I'm talking to my—" "You said what you came to say." Matteo's voice was unchanged. Same quiet, same temperature. "She heard you. Now go back to your table." Julian stared at him. The moment stretched. Marina could feel the other guests at the periphery of her awareness, the held breath of a room that has been waiting all evening for something to resolve and still cannot tell which way it will go. Julian turned and walked back to his table. Marina released a breath through her nose, slowly, so it wouldn't show. Matteo refilled his water glass. "He's not wrong," he said, without preamble or softening. Marina turned to look at him. "About the bottom line," Matteo said. "There is one. There always is. I want the ports. I want the Cabrini documentation. I want Julian out of a position where he can make that problem worse. Everything I said is true, and none of it is free." He looked at her steadily. "I thought you should hear me say it plainly." "Why?" "Because you're going to be living with it," he said, "and I don't like surprises." Marina considered that. "What does living with it look like?" "You'll have access to the estate, an account for your personal use, legal protections that are absolute. If anyone in any family attempts to use you as leverage, they will find it was a poor decision." A pause. "I'm not going to be a husband in the conventional sense. I travel. I work. The arrangement will look like a marriage in public and function like a business partnership in private. You'll have latitude that you did not have with Julian." "And?" He raised an eyebrow. "Fractional." "There's always an and," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile. The structural precondition of one, maybe. "You will represent this family appropriately at events where your presence is required. You will not discuss our business outside this family. And if the arrangement becomes something other than what I've described," he said, and his voice changed just slightly, something in the register of it, "we address it like adults." Marina looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said. Across the room, Kara was leaning toward Julian, speaking quietly. Julian wasn't listening. He was staring at the table with the expression of a man who is running calculations and not liking the results. The lawyer, or whoever Julian had actually been calling, called back at 10:11 p.m. Marina watched Julian's face as he took the call, watched the specific journey of it, from whatever he'd been hoping to hear to whatever he was actually hearing, the subtle collapse of one expression into another. He ended the call, sat very still. Then he looked across the room at Matteo. Matteo did not look back. He was speaking quietly to one of the men at the head table, the conversation evidently about something else entirely, something that predated this evening and would continue after it. The deliberate inattention was, Marina understood, its own kind of statement. She reached for her water glass. Her hand was fine. The shaking she'd been bracing for since she'd dropped the ring into Julian's wine glass simply had not materialized. She couldn't decide if that meant she was holding herself together unusually well, or if she hadn't fully processed what was happening yet. Both seemed possible. At 10:29 p.m., a man appeared at Matteo's shoulder, late 40s, compact, with the look of someone who managed things. He set a folder on the table and stepped back. Matteo slid the folder toward Marina without opening it. "Take your time," he said. She opened it. Legal paper, dense with language, 2 copies, flagged with colored tabs. She was not a lawyer. She had a general fluency in contracts. Her father had insisted she understand the documents she signed, one of the better gifts he'd given her. And she read through it with the focused attention of someone who understands that the details will matter later, even when the broad strokes are already decided. The core terms were what he'd described. The protections were real. The language around Vale shipping was specific and favorable in ways that would have taken her father's legal team months to negotiate from scratch. There was a clause about duration. The marriage was not specified as temporary, which she'd half expected, but neither was it described as permanent. It was described as ongoing until mutually dissolved by written agreement. She found a clause in the third section she hadn't expected. What's this? She pointed to a paragraph near the bottom of page 4. Mateo leaned over to read it. His shoulder was 2 inches from hers. He smelled like cedar and something colder, the kind of scent that didn't announce itself. Inheritance clause, he said. If the arrangement extends beyond 7 years, you receive a percentage of the Sorrento estate in the event of my death. Marina looked at him. I'm 53, he said. It's practical. It's also... She stopped herself. Generous? He sat back. I was going to say unexpected. Most things worth having are. She read to the end of both copies. Then she picked up the pen that had been set beside the folder. Her hand was steady, and she signed her name the way she always signed it, with the particular emphasis on the V that her father had taught her, back when she was 11 years old, and he told her that a signature was the one piece of yourself you put on everything, so it should look like it meant something. She signed both copies and pushed the folder toward Mateo. He signed without reading. She noticed that. You're not going to read it? She said. I wrote it, he said. He slid one copy back to her and closed the folder over the other. The man at his shoulder appeared again, took the folder, disappeared. It's done, Mateo said. The words landed simply. Marina let them settle. It's done. 5 years of a marriage, undone. Something new, beginning. The particular disorientation of a hinge moment. She'd had a few in her life, and she always felt them the same way, like stepping from one room into another and the air having a different quality, different pressure, before your eyes adjusted. She looked across the room at Julian. He was already looking at her, and she understood from the expression on his face, not rage, not yet, that would come later. She understood that he had just understood what the folder meant. He'd watched the man take it away. He knew what signed documents and folders meant in this world. He stood up. Kara reached for his arm. He shook her off. The second time tonight, Marina noticed, and crossed the room in 12 steps, and this time he was not performing. This time he arrived at the head table with the specific energy of a man who has lost the ability to manage himself. You cannot be serious, he said. Not to Marina, to Mateo. Mateo looked at him. She is my wife, Julian said. Whatever she just signed, whatever you told her, she is my wife. There are laws, there are procedures. You can't just... He stopped. Something in Mateo's expression, or the absence of expression, had interrupted whatever he'd been going to say. Uncle. His voice changed, lower. The performance of control attempting to reassemble itself. Whatever problem you have with how I've handled the Cabrini contracts, we can sit down. We can fix it. You don't need to do this. I know I don't need to, Mateo said. Julian's hand came down on the table. Not a slam. He pulled it, just barely, landed it instead as a flat, controlled impact. The crystal glasses registered it. The nearest guests registered it. She doesn't know what she's agreed to. She's angry. She's reacting. And you're using that. You're using her. Julian. Mateo's voice was the same. Completely the same temperature, same register, the absolute refusal to modulate in response to whatever emotion was thrown at it. You brought your mistress to your anniversary dinner. You threatened your wife's family in front of witnesses. You have been running a ghost subsidiary through Vale credentials for 18 months. A pause. You made this bet in stages. Don't stand in front of me and act surprised that it's uncomfortable. The color in Julian's face was doing something complicated. Marina watched it. She had seen Julian angry before, had calibrated herself against Julian's anger for years, had learned its patterns, its phases, the particular warning signs that preceded its worst expressions. This was something different. This was Julian's anger with nowhere to go, no available target that wasn't also a trap. His eyes moved to Marina. You don't know what he is, he said. You think tonight was bad. You think what I did was... He exhaled, pressed his thumb against his mouth. The gesture was so familiar, so specifically Julian, that Marina felt something move in her chest. Not love, the ghost of it maybe. The hollow space where love had been before she understood what she'd actually been living in. You have no idea what you just walked into. I walked into it with my eyes open, she said. You walked into it with a pen. Julian? Matteo stood. The effect was immediate. Not because Matteo moved toward Julian. He didn't. He simply rose to his full height, and the room shifted around that fact, the way rooms did. And Julian took half a step back without appearing to take half a step back. Matteo looked at him for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was still quiet. It would always be quiet. That was the thing about it, Marina would understand later, the thing that made it more effective than shouting. It was the voice of a man who had never once needed to raise it to be heard. You will go back to your table, Matteo said. You will finish your dinner. You will not speak to my wife again tonight. And tomorrow morning you will have your people call my people about the Cabrini documentation, and we will begin the process of untangling the mess you've made. He paused. If you do anything else tonight, Julian, I will not be in a position to help you with what comes after. The word help hung in the air. Julian looked at Marina one last time. She looked back. She did not look away first. The small revolution of it, the specific personal revolution, surprised her with its intensity. She had spent 5 years looking away first. He walked back to his table. Matteo sat down. Marina realized she'd been holding her upper body rigid for the last 4 minutes and consciously released it, the muscles of her back and shoulders unclenching with an almost audible internal sound. She pressed her feet flat against the floor, drew a slow breath. He'll try something tonight, she said. He won't just go home. I know, Matteo said. What kind of something? Something with the documentation. Matteo reached for his water. He'll try to move the Cabrini files before morning. He has someone inside the registrar's office, has had for 2 years. He'll try to use that access to alter the subsidiary records before I can get to them. Marina turned to look at him. You know about that too. I know about most things, Matteo said. The ones I don't know about usually find me. Then why? She stopped. Why wait? He set his glass down. Because some things need to reach their natural conclusion before you address them. Julian had to make his position clear. I needed to see what he would do with the opportunity. A look in her direction, brief, calibrated. He exceeded my expectations, downward. Marina absorbed that. And what happens if he gets to the files first? He won't. You can't know, Shema. I already moved them, Matteo said. 3 days ago, when I arranged this dinner. Marina went still. You arranged this dinner, she said slowly. I suggested the venue, Matteo said. Julian chose the occasion. He chose to bring Kara. He chose to say what he said. A pause. I arranged the circumstances. What happened inside them was his choice. The words rearranged themselves in her head. The candlelit rooftop, the private event, the family dinner that had coincided so conveniently with her anniversary. She thought about the folder that had appeared so quickly, the lawyer, the document that had been precise in ways that took months to negotiate. How long? She said. Matteo considered. I became aware of the Cabrini situation 8 months ago. I became aware of Julian's intentions toward your marriage around the same time. You've known for 8 months. I've been preparing for 8 months, he said. There's a difference. Marina looked at him, really looked at him, the way she should have been looking at people for years instead of taking them at the story they presented. She looked at the steadiness of him, the absence of performance, the particular calm of a man who was exactly as dangerous as he appeared to be and didn't need her to understand that because he already knew it himself. You used me, she said. I offered you a solution to a problem you were already in, he said. What you did with it was your decision. That's a careful distinction. Yes, he said. It is. Marina sat with that. Outside, the city made its sounds. Inside, the dinner was resuming, or attempting to. Guests returning to their meals with the careful normalcy of people who had witnessed something and were choosing, professionally, to unknow it. The string quartet had found a new piece, something slower. At Julian's table, Kara was eating. Julian was not. Julian was doing something on his phone with the focused urgency of a man running out of time, and Marina watched him and understood, with a clarity that had not been available to her an hour ago, that Julian had never been the architect of anything. He had always been working inside someone else's structure. The Sorrento structure. His uncle's structure. The difference, she understood now, was that Matteo built structures that held. Julian built ones that looked good until they didn't. She thought about her father, about the documents filed under his name, about 18 months of a ghost company running through his ports, accruing liability he didn't know about, building the kind of exposure that could destroy everything he'd spent 50 years building. The anger arrived then. Not the cold, suspended kind she'd been operating on since Julian walked through the door. The real kind. The hot, dense kind. The kind that lives in the chest and the throat and requires active management to keep out of the voice. I want to know everything, she said, about the subsidiary, about what's been running through my father's ports, all of it. Matteo looked at her. Tomorrow, he said. Now. A pause. Something in his expression shifted, not softened exactly, but adjusted, in the way of someone revising an assessment. Tomorrow morning, he said. My office. 7 a.m. He held her gaze. Tonight you need to sleep. I won't sleep. Probably not, he agreed. But you should be somewhere quiet when you don't. At Julian's table, Julian stood. He pocketed his phone. He looked at Kara, said something brief, and she nodded. He turned and walked, not toward Marina, not toward the head table, but toward the elevator. Coat. Gone. Marina watched him go. He left Kara, she said. He does that, Matteo said. When the situation changes faster than his plan, he abandons the non-essential elements. The elevator doors closed. Kara sat alone at the table, looking at her plate. Marina felt, briefly and inconveniently, something close to pity. She dismissed it. Kara had made her choices with sufficient information. The waiter appeared with menus, actual dinner. The event apparently was continuing. Marina looked at the menu without seeing it. Her mind was running Julian's trajectory, where he was going, what he was doing, what he thought he had left to work with. The Cabrini files were gone. Whatever he'd been hoping to move had already been moved. He knew that now, or he was about to know it, and the knowledge would either push him toward some kind of accommodation or push him somewhere worse. She didn't know him well enough anymore to predict which. That was the thing she hadn't expected. The realization that 5 years of living with someone had not, in the end, given her a reliable map of who they were. It had given her a map of who they performed. The actual person underneath had apparently been doing things, making choices, running a ghost company through her father's name, for long enough that the marriage she thought she'd had existed mostly in her own head. The sea bass is good here, Matteo said. Marina looked at him. He was reading the menu, completely, perfectly normal. The equanimity of it was almost offensive. You're ordering food, she said. I haven't eaten since noon, he said. She looked back at her menu. Her eyes found the sea bass. She thought about the Cabrini subsidiary. She thought about her father's ports. She thought about Julian's phone, urgent and purposeful, the thing he was doing right now, wherever he'd gone. She thought, tomorrow at 7 a.m., Matteo's office. 7 a.m. She thought, you have just signed a contract making you the wife of the most dangerous man in this city. She thought, and your hands are still not shaking. The waiter returned. Sea bass, Marina said, and whatever he's having for the first course. Matteo ordered without looking up from the menu. His voice was quiet, as always, precise about what he wanted. And when the waiter left, the silence between them settled into something that was not comfortable exactly, but was no longer raw. It had edges, this silence, and neither of them moved to fill it. Marina looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, Julian was moving. She could feel it the way you felt weather before it arrived. A pressure change, a shift in the quality of the air. He hadn't left because he was finished. He'd left because he needed different tools than the ones available to him in this room. She looked at Matteo. What isn't in the contract? She said. He looked up. You said the terms were what you described. You said you don't like surprises. She kept her voice neutral, careful. So tell me what isn't in it. Tell me what I'm going to find out in 3 months that you didn't mention tonight. Matteo was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was deciding, not stalling. There is a man, he said finally, named Carver Reed. He runs a federal task force based out of the Chicago field office. He has been building a case against this family for 4 years. He set the menu down. 3 weeks ago, he received a new source, someone inside the family who agreed to provide documentation. Marina's stomach dropped. Julian, she said. We don't know yet, Matteo said. But Julian left this room very quickly after signing nothing, with a great deal of urgency, having just lost his primary leverage. He looked at her steadily. And Carver Reed's task force is the one entity that has the power to invalidate everything you and I just signed. The sea bass arrived. Marina looked at her plate, then at Matteo, then at the elevator where Julian had disappeared 20 minutes ago, coat and phone and urgency and whatever remained of a plan she hadn't fully seen. The sea bass went cold. Marina didn't notice at first. She was running the math, the specific, ugly math of what Matteo had just told her. And the food on her plate had become irrelevant in the way that physical objects became irrelevant when the mind was doing something urgent with all available resources. Julian, a federal task force, documentation. She said, How long have you known he might be talking to Reed? 2 weeks, Matteo said. And you still arranged tonight, because waiting made it worse. He picked up his fork. The equanimity was real, she understood now. It wasn't performance. It wasn't the cultivated calm of someone suppressing panic. It was the genuine temperature of a man who had been in worse rooms than this one and had learned through necessity to eat when food was available. If Julian was going to move toward Reed, he was going to do it with or without tonight. Tonight changed the sequence. It didn't create the problem. It accelerated it. Yes. Marina stared at her plate. The sea bass sat in its sauce, cooling, indifferent. She picked up her fork because her hands needed something to do, set it down again. If Julian gives Reed the Cabrini documentation, she said, what happens to my father? Matteo was quiet for exactly the length of time that told her he'd already worked through the answer and was deciding how to deliver it. The Ghost LLC is filed under Veil Credentials, he said. Reed's team won't distinguish between what your father knew and what Julian did in his name. Not initially. The investigation would open against Veil Shipping as an entity. Which means my father. Which means your father. Marina pressed the heel of her hand against the table. Not hard, just enough to feel the edge of something solid. He had a cardiac event 8 months ago. A federal investigation. She stopped, breathed. He's 71 years old. I know. Don't say you know, she said, and the sharpness in her voice surprised her, came out faster than she'd authorized it. Don't just say you know and keep eating. If you've known about this for 2 weeks and you knew about the subsidiary for 8 months and you arranged tonight. She stopped again. Her jaw was tight. What is my father to you? In this calculation, what does he actually represent? Matteo set his fork down. He turned to look at her directly, and the attention was complete. Not the deflecting attention of someone managing a difficult conversation, but the total focus of someone who had decided to answer honestly and was doing so. Your father represents a port infrastructure that took 50 years to build and cannot be replicated, he said. His contracts represent access to 3 coastal routes that I have wanted controlled by this family for a decade. And his health, a pause, is a variable I am aware of and have factored into the timeline. Factored in. Marina, he is a person, she said. The words came out low, not loud. Low was worse. She'd learned that from watching Matteo work. Low meant it was real. He is my father. He is not a variable. I know that too, Matteo said, and the way he said it was different from the first time. Something in the register of it, a slight dropping of the professional distance, not much, almost nothing, but enough to be legible. I will not let the Reed investigation reach him. That is not a reassurance. It is a statement of intent with resources behind it. Marina looked at him. She was trying to find the lie in it and couldn't, which did not mean there wasn't one. Only that Matteo Sorrento was considerably better at not showing the seams than most people she'd dealt with. Her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. Her father's name. She stood up immediately, the chair moving back, and stepped away from the table. She pressed the phone to her ear and walked toward the far railing. The same railing where, an hour ago, she had agreed to a marriage that had already reorganized her entire life. Dad. Marina. His voice was careful. Her father's voice was always careful when he was frightened, became precise and measured, as if formality could hold things in place. I've had a call. Her stomach dropped further than she'd thought it could. From who? A man named Carver Reed. He says he's with the federal. I know who he is. She turned her back to the room. The city was below her, indifferent and lit. What did he say? He says there's an investigation into Vale shipping. He says there are documents. A pause, and she heard in the pause the sound of her father trying to understand something that made no sense to him. He was a man who had built something real, from real work, and the idea that it could be used against him without his knowledge would not be arriving cleanly. He says there is a subsidiary, filed under my name. Marina, I did not authorize any subsidiary. I did not sign. You signed something, she said. 18 months ago. You signed something that Julian told you was a different document. Silence. Dad. Julian, her father said. The single word carried an entire architecture of revision. Everything he'd believed about his son-in-law reorganizing itself in real time, and Marina could hear the physical effort of it, could hear the thing it was doing to his chest. Listen to me, she said. She kept her voice even, professional, the voice she used when her father needed steadiness from her. I need you to not speak to Reed again tonight. Do not call him back. Do not answer if he calls. Can you do that? Marina, if there's an investigation, I'm handling it. The words came out before she had a full plan behind them, which was unlike her. She was usually not a person who promised outcomes she couldn't see the path to yet. But her father was 71 and had a heart that had already given him one warning. And the sound of his voice right now was the sound of a man at the edge of something that his body might not negotiate well. I am handling it. Tonight. Don't talk to anyone. I'll call you in the morning. Marina, I promise, Dad. Go to sleep. She ended the call, stood at the railing for 3 seconds, counted them, then turned back toward the room. Mateo had not watched her make the call. He was speaking with the compact man who managed things. She still didn't know his name. Their voices inaudible. The conversation brief and evidently already in progress when she'd stood up. The compact man nodded and was gone before Marina returned to the table. She sat down. Reed already called my father. Mateo's expression changed by approximately nothing. When? He was on the phone just now. Mentioned documents. The subsidiary. Mateo was quiet for a moment. Reed moved faster than expected. Or Julian called him from the elevator. A pause. Then, yes. The word landed with the quality of something settling into place. Not surprise. Recognition. The particular recognition of a man whose model of events had been correct, but whose timeline had been compressed. Marina said, You need to tell me what resources you actually have against Reed's task force. Not in general, specifically. What can you actually do before morning? Mateo looked at her for a moment. She had the sense he was revising something. Some assessment of her, some category she'd been filed in, and that the revision was upward. Come with me, he said. They left the rooftop dinner still in progress, the string quartet playing, the guests doing the professional thing of eating and speaking and performing normalcy around the crater that had opened in the middle of their evening. Marina noted as she followed Mateo toward a side door she hadn't registered before that Kara was gone. Sometime between Julian's exit and Reed's phone call, Kara had quietly ceased to be present. The side door opened onto a private elevator, smaller than the main one, paneled in dark wood and operated with a key. Mateo produced the key without searching for it. The elevator descended, not to the lobby, but to a floor Marina hadn't known existed. A mezzanine level, carpeted, with the hush of a space that absorbed sound. A conference room. Oval table, 8 chairs, 3 laptops already open, 2 men Marina didn't know standing when they entered. The compact man from upstairs was already there. Luca, Mateo said. The compact man, Luca, pulled up something on the nearest laptop. Reed's team filed a motion for documentation hold at 9:47 p.m. Federal judge in the Northern District signed it at 10:02. Marina looked at the time on the wall clock, 10:44 p.m. That's fast. Reed had it ready, Luca said. He was waiting for a trigger. Julian called him, Marina said, from the elevator, at approximately 10:15. Luca made a note. Then Julian provided the trigger. The hold covers all documentation related to Vale Shipping LLC subsidiaries, including the Cabrini entity. Which we moved, Marina said. Which we moved, Matteo confirmed. But the original registration records are not ours to move. They sit with the state registrar. Reed can access those independently. Marina pulled out a chair and sat at the table without waiting to be invited. The two men she didn't know glanced at each other, then at Matteo, who gave no visible reaction. What do the registrar records actually show? Luca turned the laptop toward her. She looked at the screen. A corporate filing, standard format, the Cabrini import entity listed with its registration date, its stated purpose, its authorized signatories. Her father's name, his signature, and Julian Sorrento's name, listed as managing director. And beside Julian's name, as the filing attorney of record, a name she hadn't expected, hadn't been looking for, that arrived in her field of vision like a physical impact. Sienna Vale. Marina sat very still. Sienna Vale was her younger sister. She said, "That's wrong." Luca said nothing. He had the quality of a man who delivered information and understood that silence was the correct response to its landing. "That name is wrong," Marina said. The words came out with strange precision, carefully spaced, because the alternative was that they would not come out at all. Sienna is not. She has nothing to do with the ports. She hasn't been involved in my father's business since. She stopped. Her sister had worked a single summer in her father's legal department 8 years ago, before the accident that had taken most of the mobility in her left hand, before the subsequent years of distance that had grown between Sienna and their father, and between Sienna and Marina, distance that Marina had attributed to grief and circumstance and had never interrogated more carefully than that. "When was this filed?" Marina asked. 22 months ago, Luca said. 22 months. Marina ran the number back. 22 months ago, she and Julian had been married for 3 years. 22 months ago, she had genuinely, completely believed, that her marriage was difficult but real, that Julian was a man with flaws who was trying, that the coldness between them was the natural settling of a relationship into its long-term shape. 22 months ago, she had attended her sister's birthday dinner, and Julian had been charming, and Sienna had laughed at his jokes, and Marina had felt, for one evening, that her life was something she could hold without it cutting her. She looked at the signature on the screen, her sister's handwriting. She knew it the way she knew her own. "Was she coerced?" Marina asked. Matteo said, "We don't know." "Was she paid?" A pause. Luca glanced at Matteo. "There are transfers," Matteo said, "to an account in Sienna's name over 14 months, beginning 2 months after the filing." The room was very quiet. The 3 laptops hummed. Somewhere in the building, climate control moved air through ducts. Marina thought about her sister's apartment, the one Julian had helped her find 2 years ago, after Sienna's lease had fallen through in the way that things fell through when you were 32 and had a disability that affected your work and a father who expressed love primarily through the language of productivity. Julian had arranged it. He'd found the apartment, negotiated the lease, had delivered it to Sienna as a kindness, and Marina had loved him for it, had believed it was evidence of the man she'd married trying to be better than he was. She thought the apartment was leverage. She thought, he's had leverage over Sienna for 2 years. She thought, Sienna knew about the subsidiary. Sienna signed the filing documents. Sienna has been taking money. And then she thought the thing that arrived last, the worst of them, the one that required her to sit completely still for a moment, because the alternative was falling apart in a conference room in front of men she had met tonight and could not afford to fall apart in front of. Sienna might have told Julian about the marriage, about tonight, about whatever Marina had let slip to her sister in the phone calls they still had, occasionally, the ones where Marina was careful about what she said, but not careful enough, not nearly careful enough. She turned to Matteo. "Does Reed know about Sienna?" "If Julian told him everything tonight," Matteo said. "Yes." "Then Reed isn't just going after the subsidiary." Marina heard her own voice come out stripped of everything except its functional core. "He's going after the filing attorney. He can use Sienna to get to my father. He can use Sienna to get to me." A pause. "He can use Sienna to get to you." The last sentence landed in a specific way. She watched Matteo receive it, watched him not react, and in the not reacting understood that he had already traced this path and was waiting to see if she could trace it too. "The marriage contract," Marina said, "signed tonight. I am now Matteo Sorrento's wife. Sienna Vale is the filing attorney on an entity that ran through my father's ports. If Reed establishes a connection between the Vale family, the Cabrini subsidiary, and this family, she stopped. He doesn't need the moved files. He has a through line that goes through Sienna directly to me, directly to you. Matteo said, yes, the single syllable, clean and absolute. Marina looked at the signature on the screen again, her sister's handwriting. The particular way Sienna formed her capital S, with the slight backward lean their father had never been able to correct. I need to talk to her, Marina said. That's not advisable tonight, Luca said. I didn't ask if it was advisable. Marina looked at Luca directly for the first time. He was 47, maybe 50, with the eyes of someone who had learned not to respond to hostility with hostility. I asked for her location. Luca looked at Matteo. Matteo said, she's at her apartment. She's been there since 7 p.m. She's had 2 calls from Julian tonight, one at 9:52, one at 10:18. Julian had called Sienna from the elevator. Marina stood up. The chair moved cleanly. Her body was doing things without her fully directing them, operating on some autopilot that had activated when the information about Sienna had arrived and was now moving her toward the next necessary thing with the mechanical efficiency of a system that had bypassed emotion temporarily, because emotion was a resource it couldn't afford. I'm going to her apartment, she said. Marina. Matteo's voice. I'm going to my sister's apartment, she said again, and looked at him. Because she is 29 years old, and she is scared right now, and she has a bad hand, and she has been caught in something that I do not believe she fully understood when she got into it, and I am not going to leave her alone with whatever Julian told her on that phone call. A pause. She held his gaze. Tell me you understand that. Something moved in Matteo's expression. Not the precondition of a smile this time, something older and less easy to name. He picked up his jacket from the back of a chair. Luca drives, he said. The drive took 11 minutes. Sienna's apartment was in Hargrove Heights, the kind of building that had been renovated twice in the last decade to justify increasing rents while maintaining the fundamental structural shortcomings of a 1960s construction. Luca drove a black car with the unremarkable quality of something chosen specifically not to be noticed. Matteo sat in the back with Marina. He did not speak. She did not speak either. She was thinking about the phone calls. The 9:52 call, 3 minutes after Julian had walked out, and what Julian had said on it. He would have needed Sienna cooperative, or at least neutralized. If Reed's team moved to compel Sienna's testimony, Julian needed to know which direction her testimony would go. He would have reminded her of the payments. He would have reminded her of the apartment. He would have deployed, Marina understood now, the specific architecture of leverage he'd been building for 2 years. She also knew her sister. Sienna Vale was not a woman who stayed scared. She was a woman who went quiet, then made a decision in the silence, and then executed it with the particular stubbornness that ran in their family like a fault line under soil, invisible until the ground moved. The question was which way Sienna had decided. Luca parked. Marina was out of the car before he'd fully stopped, crossing the pavement toward the building entrance, buzzing Sienna's apartment with the sustained pressure of someone who needed to be heard through whatever barrier their sister had put up. 3 seconds. 5. 7. Who is it? Sienna's voice through the intercom. Flat, controlled. The voice of someone who had been prepared for a knock. It's me, Marina said. A longer pause. The door buzzed open. 4th floor, no elevator. The building's second structural shortcoming. And Marina took the stairs with Matteo a step behind her and Luca staying by the car, which she noted and filed. The hallway on the 4th floor smelled like old carpet and a neighbor's cooking. Sienna's door was the third on the left. It opened before Marina could knock. Sienna Vale was 29, dark-haired like their father, with their mother's eyes and the particular quality of physical self-consciousness that had developed after the accident. A slight angling of her left side. The damaged hand held close to her body. She was wearing a sweater too large for her hair loose, and her face had the specific expression of someone who had been crying recently and had stopped and was not going to start again in front of witnesses. She looked at Marina. She looked at Matteo. Something in her face went very still. You know who he is, Marina said. Not a question. Julian told me, Sienna said. Her voice was rough. Julian told me everything. He called me. She stopped, pressed her good hand against the door frame. He said you'd come. He said when you came, I should tell you. Another stop. He said I should tell you that it's too late. Too late for what? Marina said. He already sent it. Sienna's eyes moved to Matteo. Something in them. Not fear exactly. The ghost of it. The aftermath. He said he already sent everything to Reed, the subsidiary documents, the payments, the filing records. She exhaled, short, controlled. He sent my name, Marina. He gave Reed my name. Marina looked at her sister, at the too large sweater, at the hand held close to the body, at the eyes that were their mother's. How much do they have? Marina said. Sienna was quiet for a moment. Then, enough. She swallowed. Marina, I didn't know what it was for. When he asked me to sign the filing, he said it was a restructuring for Dad's legal hold. He said Dad knew. He said it was a favor, a way of helping Dad avoid some probate complication, and Her voice fractured. She held it. I should have looked. I know I should have looked. Sienna. And then the payment started, and I knew it wasn't right, but I needed... She stopped. Her jaw worked. The apartment. My hand. The medical costs. Marina, Her voice fractured again, and this time she didn't fully close it. The word came out broken. Afraid. Marina crossed the threshold without deciding to, and put her arms around her sister. And Sienna held on with one full hand and one that gripped as well as it could, and neither of them said anything for a moment. The hallway smelled like old carpet. Matteo stood at the door and did not move. Marina pulled back first, looked at her sister's face. Reed's team is going to contact you for testimony. I know. When they do, Marina said, you do not speak to them without a lawyer. Not one word. Do you understand me? Julian said if I cooperate with Reed, he'll... Julian, Marina said, no longer has the ability to do anything to you. She said it with a steadiness she was constructing in real time, assembling it from available materials, rage and determination, and the specific love of a woman for a younger sister who had made a bad decision in a scared moment, which was a thing Marina was in no position to judge. Julian is going to be managed. Whatever he told you tonight, whatever he threatened, it is over. Sienna looked past Marina at Matteo. Is that true? Sienna said. Matteo looked at her. Yes, he said. Sienna studied him for a moment with the particular skepticism of someone who has recently been lied to by a man who also seemed certain. Then she looked back at Marina, and the look between them was the look of sisters, of shared childhood in their mother's eyes and years of complicated distance that had never become actual absence. Okay, Sienna said. Her voice was small, then firmer. Okay, Marina said, pack a bag. You're not staying here tonight. While Sienna moved to the bedroom, Marina turned back to Matteo. The hallway was tight. He was closer than she'd registered, and in the confined space, the quality of his presence was different than it had been across a rooftop or a conference table. More specific, more physical, less manageable by distance. Reed's going to move on the testimony angle first, she said. Her voice was low. If he gets Sienna on the record before we have a lawyer established, the through line holds. I have a lawyer, Matteo said. Who can work tonight? Who never stops working, he said. Marina held his gaze. She was aware, in some part of her brain that had stayed operational through all of it, that she was standing in her sister's hallway in a burgundy dress at 11 p.m., having signed a marriage contract 3 hours ago, negotiating federal legal strategy with a man she had met twice before tonight. She was aware that this was the furthest she had ever stood from the life she had expected to be living. She was also aware that she was not afraid. The absence of fear was almost more frightening than fear would have been. Sienna came back with a bag in her good hand. She looked at Marina. Then at the apartment, the way people look at spaces they are leaving under duress. A quick catalog, a closing. Marina's phone lit up. Unknown number. Chicago area code. She knew before she answered. Ms. Vale. The voice on the other end was measured, professional, with the specific neutrality of someone accustomed to delivering news that reorganized people's lives. This is Special Agent Carver Reed. I apologize for the hour. I'm calling because we have a situation that requires your attention before morning, and I think it would benefit both of us to speak now rather than through counsel. A pause. We've taken Julian Sorrento into custody 40 minutes ago, and he's told us something about your husband that I think you need. We've taken Julian Sorrento into custody 40 minutes ago, and he's told us something about your husband that I think you need. Marina ended the call. The hallway went quiet. Sienna was looking at her. Mateo was looking at her. The phone was still in her hand, and she was looking at it with the particular focus of someone deciding whether the object itself was the problem. "Read," she said. "I heard," Mateo said. "He has Julian." "I heard that too." She looked up. "He said Julian told him something about you. Something Reed thinks I need to know before morning." She watched Mateo's face with the same attention she'd been developing all evening. The specific skill of reading a man who did not perform. "What is it?" Mateo was quiet for 3 seconds. She counted. "There's a shipment," he said, "coming through the northern port corridor. Tonight." Marina stared at him. "Tonight?" "It was scheduled before any of this. The timing is... What's in it?" Another pause. Shorter this time. "Medical equipment," he said. "Legitimately? Cardiac monitors, surgical supplies, contracted to 3 hospitals in the region." He held her gaze. "But the manifest also carries documentation that Reed's team, if they intercept it tonight, can use to establish the operating pattern of the Cabrini subsidiary. Not the files we moved. The physical pattern, the route, the port entry, the veil clearance codes that Julian never deactivated." Marina's chest tightened. Julian didn't deactivate them because he was going to use them tonight. "To give Reed a live intercept," Mateo said. "Something the task force could take to a judge that wasn't just documents, an active operation." "He planned this before tonight," Marina said. "Before the dinner. He was always going to give Reed a live intercept. Tonight was..." She stopped, the full shape of it arriving. "Tonight was Julian covering his exit. He humiliated me. He triggered you. He signed nothing. And then he walked out and made one phone call. He gave Reed the trigger, and Reed already had the intercept position." Mateo said nothing. "You knew about the shipment," Marina said. "You knew it was tonight." "I knew." "Then why?" "Because I didn't know Julian had already given Reed the port entry codes," Mateo said. "I thought the shipment was clean enough to run. I was wrong about what Julian had already provided." The words landed in the specific way that admissions of error landed from men who did not make them often. Marina felt Sienna shift behind her, the weight of her sister's presence, the bag in her good hand. Marina said, "How long before the shipment reaches the port entry?" Mateo looked at his watch. 90 minutes, maybe less. And if Reed's team intercepts it. The clearance codes link it to Veil shipping. The route documentation links it to Cabrini. Reed establishes a live active operation tonight with physical evidence, and the marriage contract we signed 3 hours ago becomes a document connecting you and your father to an active federal case. He paused. It becomes, in Reed's hands, evidence of conspiracy rather than protection. Marina turned to Sienna. "You're going downstairs with Luca. You'll get in the car. You will not use your phone." Sienna opened her mouth. "Sienna." Marina's voice, low, final. Her sister closed her mouth, looked at Mateo once more with those complicated eyes, and went to the stairs. Marina turned back to Mateo. The hallway felt smaller. "Who controls the northern port corridor tonight?" "My man is on the gate," Mateo said. "But Reed can go over the gate. He has federal authority to bypass port security if he has a signed intercept order." "Does he have one?" "He will within the hour." Marina was already moving toward the stairs. "Call your man at the gate. Tell him to hold the shipment at the outer perimeter. Don't let it enter the port proper. Keep it in the commercial staging area. That's not Veil territory. It's neutral." "That buys 40 minutes, Mateo said, following her. His voice was entirely level. She would notice later that he'd stopped questioning her and started following her about 6 minutes ago, and she'd been too focused to register it at the time. 40 minutes is enough, she said. It wasn't, and she knew it wasn't. But 40 minutes was what existed, and you worked with what existed. The car. Luca driving. Sienna in the front seat with the stillness of someone who had decided to stop arguing. Marina in the back with Mateo, and the specific silence of two people rapidly processing a shared problem. The city moved past the windows, indifferent, lit. Marina called Reed back. He answered on the first ring, which told her he'd been holding the phone. "Ms. Vale," he said. "Mrs. Sorrento," she said. The words cost her something. She paid it. I'm told you have my former husband in custody. A pause. Calibrating. We took Mr. Sorrento in for questioning at 10:07 this evening, yes. And he's been cooperative. Mr. Sorrento has been very forthcoming. I'm sure he has. Marina watched the city pass. A light changed ahead of them, red to green, and Luca accelerated without being asked. Mr. Reed, you're looking at a subsidiary filing, a set of clearance codes, and a shipment that you're planning to intercept in the next hour. You believe those three things taken together establish an operating pattern for an illegal enterprise running through Vale shipping. Silence. Then, that's a reasonable characterization. It's wrong, she said. The subsidiary was created without my father's knowledge or consent, using documents he signed under false representation. The clearance codes were never deactivated because the man who created the subsidiary retained access after he lost authorized standing. And the shipment is legitimate medical equipment contracted to regional hospitals, which your intercept will delay by a minimum of 72 hours, because federal hold procedures take 72 hours minimum. And 3 hospitals will be without contracted equipment for 3 days because your task force is acting on information provided by a man who is handing you everything he has left in exchange for walking away from a federal conspiracy charge himself. She stopped. Let that sit. Reed said, Mr. Sorrento has provided documentation. Mr. Sorrento created the documentation, Marina said. In my father's name. Without my father's knowledge. I have the original signing records. What my father actually authorized versus what was filed. I have the payment records to the filing attorney who was coerced into participation and has agreed to full cooperation. She paused. I also have a marriage contract signed 3 hours ago, which means anything you do tonight to my father's business, you're doing to a Vale who is now a Sorrento, and the legal landscape of that is significantly more complicated than what you had at 9 p.m. Reed was quiet for 6 seconds. She counted. She was getting good at counting. You're asking me to pull back the intercept, he said. I'm asking you to spend 40 minutes looking at what Julian Sorrento actually gave you versus what I'm telling you tonight, Marina said. If you still want to intercept after that, I can't stop you. But you're going to look very different in front of a judge when the defense presents the coercion records and the original Vale documents and the timeline of what Julian was doing tonight while you were processing his statement. Another silence. Where are you right now, Mrs. Sorrento? Reed said. On my way to the port, she said. I want to be there when you decide. She ended the call. The car was quiet for a moment. Matteo said, The coercion records. Sienna will cooperate, Marina said. She'll testify to what Julian told her when he asked her to sign. She'll produce the payment records. The timeline of the payment starting 2 months after the filing is evidence of coercion, not conspiracy. Reed won't accept that without corroboration. Then we get him corroboration in 40 minutes. Marina looked at him directly. You have people inside the registrar's office. Julian's man inside that office, the one who is going to alter records, is now a liability Julian just burned by handing everything to Reed. That man has one move left. He cooperates with us to avoid being caught in Julian's wreckage. She held Matteo's gaze. Call him. Matteo looked at her for a long moment. Then he took out his phone and made a call that lasted 45 seconds and consisted almost entirely of Matteo listening and then saying 2 sentences that Marina couldn't fully hear. He put the phone away. He'll cooperate. Good, Marina said. And then, because her body had been running on something that wasn't adrenaline exactly, but was adjacent to it, she leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for exactly 4 seconds and breathed. When she opened them, Matteo was watching her, not with calculation, with something she didn't have a name for yet. You've done this before, he said. I have not, she said. You negotiate like someone who has. I grew up watching my father build something from nothing, she said. I watched him read every contract, every room, every silence. She looked out the window. I just stopped pretending I hadn't learned it. The northern port entrance was a gate structure off Industrial Corridor 7, lit by sodium lights that turned everything the color of an old bruise. Luca stopped the car 200 meters from the gate at the edge of the staging area where the light got thin. 3 trucks were visible, parked and waiting, their cargo holds closed. 2 of Matteo's men stood at the gate, talking to the port official Marina assumed was the man Mateo had called. And at the far end of the staging area, two dark SUVs with government plates sat with their engines running. Reed was already here. Marina got out of the car before Luca had fully stopped. The night air was cold at the water, different from city cold. It had weight and salt and the smell of diesel and distance. Her heels on the concrete were too loud, and she couldn't do anything about that. She walked toward the government vehicles. A man got out of the first SUV, 50s, lean, with the look of someone who slept rarely and had made peace with it. He wore a jacket that said nothing and eyes that said everything. "Mrs. Sorrento," he said. "Mr. Reed," she said. He looked past her at Mateo, who had come to stand at her shoulder. Not in front of her, at her shoulder, which she noted, and something moved through Reed's expression. Professional recalibration. "You made good time," Reed said. "I had a reason to," Marina said. "Do you have the intercept order signed?" "I have it in process." "Then we have time to talk." She didn't wait for his agreement. She started talking, because 40 minutes was not 40 minutes anymore. The government vehicles had been here before they arrived, which meant Reed's timeline was compressed, which meant she had less runway than she'd calculated in the car. "The filing attorney is prepared to provide a sworn statement tonight. The registrar's office contact will provide the original documentation of what was authorized versus what was filed. I can have both of those in your hands before you execute the intercept." Reed's jaw was working slightly. The jaw of a man who had built a case over 4 years and was now watching it reconfigure in real time. "Mr. Sorrento's statement. Julian gave you what he needed you to have to walk out of that room," Marina said. "He gave you the shape of a case, not the substance of one. He gave you codes he created. He gave you a route he designed. He gave you a subsidiary he built in my father's name while my father's back was turned." Her voice was steady. It had been steady for 3 hours, and she was beginning to understand it would be steady because she had decided it would be, and she had made harder decisions tonight. "You have a case against Julian Sorrento. You have always had a case against Julian Sorrento. What you don't have, and what you will not be able to build tonight, is a case against Thomas Vale." Reed looked at her, then at the trucks in the staging area, then at Mateo. "I want the filing attorney's statement in writing," Reed said. "Sworn, tonight." "You'll have it within the hour," Marina said. "And the registrar documentation." "Same." Reed studied her. The sodium lights made his face hard to read. They made everything hard to read, flattened the world to orange and shadow. Julian Sorrento also told us that he has physical documentation of payments made from Sorrento accounts to port officials over a period of 3 years, he said. Documentation that doesn't involve Vale shipping at all, but which he says is currently hidden inside the cargo hold of the lead truck. He gestured toward the vehicles behind Marina. "Which is why I'm here, regardless of what else tonight involves." Marina went still. She turned slowly and looked at the trucks. Then she turned back to Reed. "He told you that tonight." "In the statement, yes." "Did he tell you where specifically?" "He was specific," Reed said. "Third panel, driver's side, behind the secondary manifold housing." Marina turned to Mateo. Mateo's face was doing something she hadn't seen it do before. Not fear. The specific hardness of someone absorbing an impact and not letting it show except in the absolute quality of their stillness. "Is it there?" she said. Quietly. "Just for him." He didn't answer immediately. "Mateo." Her voice, low, private. "I don't know," he said. The 3 words from a man who always knew were the most frightening thing she'd heard all evening. Reed was watching both of them, reading them. He was good at his job, she understood that. 4 years of building a case on this family was not the work of a man who missed things. "Mrs. Sorrento," he said, "if the documentation is where Mr. Sorrento says it is, then what happens next is significantly outside the scope of anything you can negotiate tonight." Marina looked at the trucks. She thought Julian planned this, not as a backup, as the plan. The dinner, the humiliation, the federal call, the intercept. All of it was misdirection. All of it was designed to put everyone, Reed, Mateo, Marina herself, looking at the subsidiary, the files, the clearance codes. While the thing Julian actually gave Reed was sitting in a truck 40 meters away in a panel behind a manifold housing, she thought, He used the shipment. He used Mateo's own shipment, the legitimate medical equipment, to carry his exit documentation. She thought, he's been inside this longer than anyone knew. She walked toward the trucks. Mrs. Sorrento, Reed started. I'm not touching anything, she said over her shoulder. I'm looking. She heard Mateo behind her. She heard Reed make a decision and follow. The staging area concrete was rough under her heels, and she didn't slow down. The lead truck was a standard cargo carrier, dark blue, with the Vail shipping clearance tag still visible on the driver door. Julian had never deactivated anything, she understood now, because he'd been planning to use everything. She walked to the driver's side, found the secondary manifold housing. She knew the layout from years of walking her father's port facilities as a teenager, from the summers she'd spent learning what the business actually was before Julian had made her stop going. Third panel. She stood in front of it and looked at it without touching it. The panel was slightly unaligned, half a centimeter, the kind of thing you'd miss in normal light, in daylight, with other things to look at. Under sodium lights, looking for it, it was visible. Someone had opened it and closed it again recently. She turned to Reed. He was 5 feet behind her. Mateo was beside him. If you open that panel, Marina said, and what Julian told you is in there, what is your next move, specifically? Reed said, we secure the shipment. We process the documentation. We expand the scope of the investigation. To include the operating leadership of the Sorrento family enterprise, Reed said, as identified in the documentation. Marina looked at Mateo. Mateo was looking at the panel. The thing about a man who never showed his hand was that when the hand finally showed, it showed completely. She could see in the quality of Mateo's attention, the particular focused stillness of it, that he was calculating something, that the calculation was taking longer than his calculations usually took, that it was costing him something. Did you know he did this? She said to him. Not loudly, just to him. No, Mateo said. She believed him. She wasn't sure that was wisdom. She looked at Reed. Give me 10 minutes before you open the panel. Reed frowned. Mrs. Sorrento, I can't. 10 minutes is not evidence tampering, she said. The panel hasn't been opened. The documentation hasn't been processed. Nothing has changed except I'm asking you for 10 minutes to make a phone call that may affect what you find when you open it. She held his gaze. You have spent 4 years on this case. 10 minutes does not move that needle, but it might change the shape of what you get at the end of it. Reed looked at her. He looked at the panel. He looked at Mateo. 10 minutes, he said. I'm timing it. Marina walked away from the truck toward the edge of the staging area where the light got thin and the sound of the water was louder. Mateo followed. When they were far enough, she turned to him. Tell me what's in that panel, she said. I told you. Tell me what Julian would have put there, she said. Not what you know. What you know is that you don't know. Tell me what you're afraid of. A long pause. Longer than anything Mateo Sorrento had paused before tonight. There are records, he said, from 3 years ago. An arrangement with a port official network that I ended 18 months ago when I understood the exposure. The arrangement was documented internally. Julian was aware of it. He had access to the documentation in his role. He stopped. His jaw moved slightly. If he copied it and put it in that panel, it is the one piece of evidence Reed cannot contextualize away. It is not coerced signatures or ghost subsidiaries. It is what it is. Marina stood in the thin light at the edge of the water and looked at the man she had married 3 hours ago and understood the complete shape of the night for the first time. Julian hadn't brought Kara to their anniversary dinner to humiliate Marina. Julian had brought Kara to their anniversary dinner because he needed witnesses to the public collapse of his marriage, to the chaos of the room, to Mateo crossing the floor toward Marina, to all of it, every moment, every scene, because a federal agent reviewing the evening's timeline would see a man reacting, not planning. Julian had manufactured his own humiliation as cover. He had been handing Reed the case all night. And the marriage contract, Marina's contract, her signature, her decision, had become the thing that connected Mateo to a Vail, which connected a Sorrento to a port operation, which connected everything Julian had put in that panel directly to the man standing in front of her. He used me, Marina said. The second time she'd said it tonight, and the second time it meant something different. He tried to, Mateo said. He succeeded. Not yet. Mateo looked at the trucks. at Reed, standing with his agents, watching the clock on his phone, at the panel that had been opened and closed and was waiting. Marina said, "What are you going to do?" Matteo looked at her, the gray eyes in the sodium light. "What are you going to do?" he said back. Not a deflection, a real question. Marina turned toward Reed. 8 minutes left. She was already walking. She walked past Reed to the truck. She stood in front of the panel. Reed came up beside her, his hand on a radio, ready to call his team forward. "I want it on the record," Marina said, "that I am voluntarily directing your attention to this location based on information received tonight from Julian Sorrento via federal statement, and that I am cooperating fully with the scope of your investigation." Reed looked at her sideways. "You're getting ahead of this." "I'm getting ahead of this," she confirmed. "Open the panel." Reed nodded to the agent on his left. The agent stepped forward with a kit and worked the panel. It came open in 15 seconds. Inside, a sealed document envelope, brown, approximately 2 centimeters thick. Reed's agent reached for it. Marina said, "That envelope was placed there by Julian Sorrento. His fingerprints are on it. My husband's are not. Your lab will confirm that." "Mrs. Sorrento." "Process it," she said. "And when you have, call me. Because what I'm about to offer you is significantly more useful than whatever Julian thought he was giving." Reed's agent sealed the envelope in an evidence bag at 11:58 p.m. Marina watched him do it. Watched the gloved hands, the zip of the bag, the tag applied with a marker in neat capital letters. She watched the way Reed's face moved as the agent handed it to him. The specific quality of a man receiving something he'd wanted for 4 years, and finding that it felt different than expected. She didn't move. Her heels were still on the staging area concrete. Her dress was still burgundy. Somewhere in the last 3 hours she had lost track of her hair, and it had come partly undone, and she hadn't fixed it because there had been no moment where fixing it was the most important available action. "I'll need to process this before any conversation," Reed said. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the evidence bag with the concentration of a man who was already mentally inside the contents. "I know," Marina said. "Process it." She turned and walked back toward the car. Matteo was standing at the edge of the staging area light, hands in his jacket pockets, watching her approach. He had not come forward during the panel opening. He had stood where he'd been, exactly where she'd left him, and she understood now that his stillness had been a kind of trust. Not in her, not yet. They were 3 hours into a legal arrangement, and trust was not a 3-hour thing, but a trust in the logic of what she was doing. A recognition that she had seen something he hadn't. She stopped in front of him. "The envelope," she said. "If it's what you think it is." "It's what I think it is," he said. "I've had enough time to be certain." Then Reed has the port official records. He has the 3-year operational pattern. She looked at him steadily. "He does not have you. Julian didn't give him you. He gave him the records of an arrangement that ended 18 months ago, which means the statute of limitations on the active operation is a conversation your lawyers have with Reed's office, not a midnight arrest." She paused. What Julian thought he was giving Reed was a live case. What he actually gave him was a closed one. The difference is negotiating room. "So que y mamasa." Matteo looked at her. "You worked that out while you were walking to the truck," he said. "I worked that out while you were deciding whether to answer my question," she said. "You paused too long. The only thing that makes a man like you pause is calculating whether the truth is more useful than the alternative." She held his gaze. "The truth was, and you knew that. You just needed a second." A silence. The water was audible beyond the staging area, cold and indifferent. "What are you going to offer Reed?" Matteo said. "You're going to offer Reed, Peri Osaki," Marina said, "through counsel. The full documentation of the Cabrini subsidiary, including proof of Julian's construction of it in my father's name, the coercion records on Siena, the registrar documentation, and the voluntary deposition of Matteo Sorrento regarding the port official arrangement, the one that ended 18 months ago, in exchange for prosecutorial focus on Julian Sorrento as the originating criminal actor in the Vale shipping case." She stopped. "Julian tried to build a ladder out of our names. You give Reed that same ladder, but you control which direction it goes." Matteo was quiet for a long moment. That puts me in a room with a federal prosecutor, he said. It does. Voluntarily. Voluntarily and with counsel and on terms your lawyers construct before any conversation happens, Marina said. Which is different from being put in that room by an evidence bag at midnight with no runway. He looked at the trucks. At Reed, speaking with his agents in a cluster near the second SUV. At the evidence bag, visible in one agent's hand. My lawyers will need 3 hours, he said. Tell them 2, Marina said. Reed won't sit on that envelope for 3. Mateo took out his phone. He walked a few feet away and made a call. Not Luca this time, someone else. A number he dialed from memory. And spoke for 90 seconds in a voice too low to hear clearly. When he came back, something in his posture had shifted. Fractional. The difference between a man who is holding a problem and a man who has transferred it to the appropriate hands. 2 hours, he said. Marina nodded. She looked at the car where Sienna was visible in the front seat, a dim shape through the window. I need to take care of my sister. Luca will take her wherever she needs to go, Mateo said. She needs to go somewhere that isn't her apartment until Julian's custody status is clear. Marina looked at Mateo. Is there somewhere in your... She stopped, found the right word. In our house. The pause before our was involuntary. She heard it herself. Mateo heard it too. There's a guest suite, he said. On the east side, private entrance. That will work, Marina said. She went to the car. Sienna turned when she opened the passenger door, and the look on her face, the specific frightened look of a younger sister who has been sitting alone in a car for 40 minutes while things happen nearby that she couldn't see, was the first thing all night that made Marina's chest do something other than tighten. It's handled, Marina said. Mostly. Come on. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. Marina looked at her. I need you to give a statement, a sworn one. Tonight, probably, or first thing in the morning, about Julian, about what he told you when you signed the filing, about the payments, all of it. Sienna's jaw moved. If you do that, the coercion defense holds, and you are a witness, not a defendant. Marina kept her voice level. If you don't, Reed's team builds their timeline around the payments and the signature and Julian's statement, and you are the filing attorney of record on a federal case with no mitigating narrative. Sienna looked at her hands, the good one and the damaged one, both in her lap. He told me Dad knew, she said. Her voice was small. Julian, when he asked me to sign, he said Dad had approved it and just couldn't be listed for liability reasons. He said it was protecting Dad. She exhaled. I wanted it to be true. I needed money, and I wanted... She stopped. I should have called you. Yes, Marina said. You should have. They looked at each other. The full weight of 2 years of distance, of careful phone calls where Marina had been not careful enough, and Sienna had been keeping a secret that cost her more to keep each month, settled between them and didn't dissolve. It didn't dissolve, she understood, because the night wasn't a solvent for 2 years, but it redistributed, changed shape. I'm sorry, Sienna said. I know, Marina said. Tell me later. Tonight you need to sleep. The car moved. Luca drove. Mateo sat in the back with Marina and looked at his phone. The first time she'd seen him check it with anything resembling urgency. And she understood his lawyers were already working. She looked out the window. The city was thinning toward its late-night version, the version that belonged to the people who worked the hours nobody else wanted. She thought about Julian in a federal holding room somewhere and tried to locate what she felt about that, and found the feeling was less than she'd expected. Not nothing, but less. The man she'd married had been someone she'd constructed from incomplete information, and the grief she'd been carrying for the last year, the grief for the marriage she'd thought she had been hollowed out further by each piece of tonight until what remained was something small and dense and no longer shaped like love. She thought about her father asleep in his house, his phone on the nightstand, the missed call from Reed that would be there in the morning. She thought about calling him now. She looked at the time. 12:34 a.m. She didn't call. Let him sleep. There was nothing he needed to do before morning, and the news could be delivered in daylight, sitting down with the particular care that a 71-year-old man with a healing heart deserved. The Sorrento estate was in the north quarter of the city, behind a wall of old trees that had grown tall enough to make the property invisible from the street. She'd never been here. Julian had referenced it, the estate, the house, the weight of the family that had operated from inside it. But she'd never been brought here. She understood now that Julian had kept her away deliberately. The estate was the center of things. Julian operated at the edges. Luca stopped at the gate. The estate presented itself in the headlights. Stone, old money, the kind of building that did not announce its history because it had never needed to. A housekeeper opened the front door before they reached it. A woman in her 60s who looked at Marina with the specific, assessing attention of someone filing information for later use. "Mrs. Sorrento," the woman said. The name landing on Marina for the second time tonight. Less strange this time. "This is my sister," Marina said. "She'll need the East Guest Suite." "Of course." Marina turned to Sienna. Her sister was looking at the house with an expression that mixed exhaustion with the particular disorientation of someone whose night had relocated them entirely. Marina touched her arm, briefly, the way their mother used to, the specific language of it, and Sienna straightened. "Get some sleep," Marina said. "I'll come find you in the morning before anything happens." Sienna nodded, went with the housekeeper. Marina stood in the entrance hall. Matteo came in behind her. The house was quiet in the way of large houses at midnight, a different quality of quiet than an apartment, deeper and more layered. "Where do I—" Marina started. "I'll show you," Matteo said. He led her up a staircase along a corridor and stopped at a door at the far end. He opened it. A bedroom, large, simply furnished, the window looking out over the back of the property where trees were visible in the dark, and beyond them, remotely, the lights of the city. "The main suite is at the other end of the hall," he said. "If you need anything, there's a house phone." Marina stood in the doorway and looked at the room. It was the first time all night she'd looked at a space that wasn't a rooftop, or a conference room, or a staging area, or a car interior. "Matteo," she said. He stopped, turned. "The thing you said at the port," she said. "About the arrangement. You said you ended it 18 months ago." She looked at him steadily. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the calculating quiet, the other kind. "Because I looked at what it was doing to the structure of things I'd built," he said, "and decided the margin wasn't worth it." "That's a business answer," she said. "Yes," he said. "Give me the other one." Another pause. He looked at her with those gray eyes in the dim hallway light, and the look was different from every other look he'd given her tonight. Less managed, the professional distance reduced by exhaustion and midnight and the specific quality of a house at rest. "I had a conversation with your father's port manager," he said, 14 months ago. "A logistics meeting, nothing significant. The man mentioned Thomas Vale, mentioned his reputation, the way he'd built the port operation, the standards he kept." He paused. "The man said Vale was the only shipping operator in the region whose crews didn't spend half their time cleaning up problems that came from the top." A beat. "I ended the arrangement the following week." Marina looked at him. "You ended a 3-year operation," she said slowly, "because someone told you my father ran a clean shop." "I ended it," Matteo said, "because I was reminded that there are ways of building things that don't require what I was doing, and I had been telling myself for 3 years that there weren't." The hallway was very quiet. "You're not entirely what I thought you were," Marina said. "I'm most of it," he said. "Don't romanticize the rest. Despite everything, despite the burgundy dress and the cold and the staging area concrete still in her muscles and the 12 hours of reconstructed reality that had preceded this hallway, she almost smiled. Almost. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said, and went to the other end of the hall. She closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, took her heels off and set them side by side on the floor, and looked at them for a moment. The shoes she'd put on 4 hours ago for a different life, the shoes of a woman trying to hold something together that she hadn't yet understood was already gone. She lay back on the bed without changing, without getting under the covers, and looked at the ceiling. She did not sleep. She did think, which was what she'd told Matteo she would do in that space. She thought about the subsidiary documents Luca would be delivering to Reed's office in the morning. She thought about the lawyers working in some office somewhere, building the framework of a voluntary deposition that would cost Matteo something and protect him from more. She thought about the evidence bag and the port records inside it, And the 4-year case that was about to be redirected from the man who'd ended the arrangement to the man who'd built his exit strategy out of other people's names. She thought about Julian, about the specific architecture of what he'd done, the patience of it, the planning, the dinner, the mistress. The mistress as a prop in a scene designed to produce chaos. The Cabrini subsidiary built over 18 months. The ghost company filed in her father's name, signed by her sister. The clearance codes never deactivated. The port records copied and hidden in a cargo panel. Every piece of it assembled in sequence. With the particular cold intelligence of a man who had always known the marriage would end and had begun building his exit before she'd finished believing in the entrance. She had spent 5 years inside that intelligence without understanding it was working against her. The thought didn't make her angry, which surprised her. It had downstairs at the staging area when she'd first understood the full shape of it. But lying here in the quiet, in a house that was not hers and was also legally hers, she found that the anger had metabolized into something else. Something more functional. The anger of a woman who has been underestimated, passed through the system and converted. At 6:15 a.m., her phone rang. Reed. She answered on the second ring. Tell me. The envelope contained what we expected, Reed said. He sounded like a man who had not slept. She had that in common with him. Port official payment records, 3 years of them, terminating 18 months ago. A pause. Mr. Sorrento's attorneys contacted my office at 2 a.m. with a proposal. I know, Marina said. Did you review it? We reviewed it. Reed's voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. Not warmth, exactly. Adjustment. The proposal is workable, preliminary. What does preliminary mean in terms of my father? Veil shipping is not our target, Reed said. The subsidiary records you've provided, the coercion documentation from the filing attorney, and the timeline your counsel has assembled make the Veil connection to the Cabrini entity a victim scenario rather than a conspiracy scenario. Another pause. She could hear him deciding. We're not going after your father, Mrs. Sorrento. Marina pressed her hand flat against the bedspread, felt the fabric, solid. And Julian, she said. Mr. Sorrento has reversed his cooperation, Reed said. When his attorneys reviewed the proposal structure this morning and understood what he'd actually given us versus what we already had, he withdrew his statement. A beat. It doesn't matter. What he gave us last night is already in evidence. His withdrawal doesn't change its admissibility. So he handed you the case and then tried to take it back. Yes. Marina was quiet for a moment. What happens to him? That's a process that will take time, Reed said carefully. But the picture is... He stopped. He built a significant exposure for himself. The subsidiary creation, the coercion, the unauthorized use of Veil credentials, the attempt to obstruct via last night's document placement. Reed's voice carried something that in another man might have been grudging respect. Your former husband believed he was the most prepared person in any room. Last night suggested otherwise. Marina thought about Julian standing at the rooftop dinner with Kara on his arm, laughing. The specific performance of it, the way the room had gone quiet. She thought about a ring dropping into a wine glass. Thank you for calling, she said. Mrs. Sorrento. Reed paused. The work you did last night, at the port, the sequencing of what you gave us and how... I want you to know that it materially affected the shape of what this case becomes. Another pause. That's not something I say often. She didn't know what to do with that, so she said nothing, and Reed ended the call. She lay on the bed for another few minutes. Then she got up, went to the window, and looked at the trees in the gray early morning light. The city was out there somewhere beyond them, already beginning its next version of itself, indifferent to what had happened the night before in the way that cities were indifferent. Absorbing events, metabolizing them, continuing. She found her way downstairs at 7. The house was beginning to wake. She could hear sounds from the kitchen, smell coffee. She followed the smell and found a large kitchen, stone surfaces, morning light from east-facing windows. Matteo was already at the table with coffee and documents that he set face down when she came in. Reed called, she said. I know, he said. My lawyers called at 6:30. She poured herself coffee and sat down across from him. Not beside him. Across. The table between them was a useful thing this morning. The contract and the port and the evidence bag in the hallway were all part of last night, and last night was still in the process of becoming something she could look at directly. "My father," she said. "I'll have someone at his house at 8, Matteo said. "To be there when he wakes up, so he's not alone when he finds out." Marina looked at him. "Someone he can trust," Matteo added. "Not one of mine. The port manager. The man who spoke to me about your father's reputation. His name is Gerald Ash. Your father knows him." Marina held her coffee cup in both hands and looked at this man who had known her for less than 12 hours and had thought to send someone her father already trusted to be there at 8 in the morning. "That was thoughtful," she said, carefully. "It was practical," Matteo said. "A man your father doesn't know showing up would cause more distress than the news itself." "Practical and thoughtful aren't mutually exclusive," she said. He looked at her over his coffee. Not the calibrating look, not the assessing one. Something quieter, worn down to its essential quality by a sleepless night. "How are you?" he said. The question landed simply. She hadn't been asked it since, she tried to remember, since before the restaurant. Since the phone call with her father 3 days ago when he'd asked how she was, and she'd said fine in the way she always said fine, which meant she had stopped believing the word applied. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He nodded, like that was the right answer, like he'd known it would be. Sienna came in at 7:40 in the same clothes as last night, her hair pulled back, her damaged hand against her ribs. She looked at Marina, then at Matteo, and there was a moment where the room held all three of them in their specific morning exhaustion. The particular intimacy of people who have been through something together and are now standing in a kitchen. "Coffee," Sienna said. "On the counter," Marina said. Sienna poured coffee. She sat down at the end of the table, not at either side, the way you sat when you were not sure of your position in a room. Marina watched her sister wrap her good hand around the mug and understood, with the particular knowledge of a woman who knew her sister, that Sienna was carrying something she hadn't said yet. "Say it," Marina said. Sienna looked up. "Whatever you haven't said, say it." Sienna's jaw moved. She looked at Matteo, then back at Marina. "Julian called me 6 months ago," she said. "Not about the subsidiary, about you." Her voice was careful, precise. The voice of someone delivering a thing they have been holding for a long time. "He said you were going to ask for a divorce, that you'd been talking to a lawyer. He said that when you did, he was going to make sure the Vale name was attached to his business in a way that meant you couldn't afford to leave." She stopped. "He told me that if I caused any problems, if I went to you, if I went to Dad, he would make sure the filing became public in a way that destroyed Dad's reputation before any defense could be mounted." "Das states it." Marina set her coffee down. 6 months, she said. "I know." "Sienna." "I know." Sienna's voice broke slightly, and she held it closed with the particular effort their mother had taught both of them, and that their mother would be appalled to see deployed here in these circumstances, over this. "I told myself I was protecting Dad. I told myself if I stayed quiet, Julian would—" She stopped again. "I was scared, Marina. I was scared and I was ashamed and I did not know how to come to you." The kitchen was quiet. Morning light on stone surfaces. The city beginning beyond the trees. Marina got up from her chair. She went to the end of the table. She sat down beside her sister and she put her arm around her, and Sienna leaned in with the specific quality of a person who has been holding their own weight for 6 months and is finally allowed to set it down for a moment. They sat like that for a while. Matteo drank his coffee and did not speak and did not leave, which was the correct thing, and Marina registered it as the correct thing without having to think about it. The morning moved. Gerald Ash arrived at Thomas Vale's home at 8:03, as arranged. Marina's father called her at 8:47, and the conversation was the hardest one of the night that had bled into day. His voice doing the frightened formal thing, and Marina talking him through it, piece by piece, the subsidiary and the signing and what Julian had done and what Reed had determined and what it meant for Vale shipping. She talked for 22 minutes. Her father was quiet for most of it. At the end, he said her name the way he'd said it when she was 8 years old and had broken something and come to him with it. "I should have protected you better," he said. "You raised me to protect myself," she said. "That's better." He was quiet again, then, "This man, Sorrento." "Yes." "You married him." "I did." A long pause. She could hear him breathing, steady, controlled. The cardiac event had scared both of them in ways they hadn't fully said to each other. "Is he good to you?" her father said. Marina looked across the kitchen at Matteo, who was standing at the window now, looking at the trees, giving her the specific privacy of his back. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in a year." Her father made a sound that might have been the beginning of something, acceptance or grief, or the specific complicated love of a man for a daughter who had always been more capable than he'd sometimes remembered to treat her. "All right," he said, "a year." She went to see Julian at 2 p.m., not at the federal building. He'd been released to his own counsel by then, pending formal charges, the particular bureaucratic half-freedom of someone in the process of being prosecuted. She went to the apartment he kept separate from the house she'd shared with him, the apartment she'd known about for 8 months and never said so. He answered the door in yesterday's shirt, his hair different than she'd ever seen it, some structural quality of him that had always been maintained now absent. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Come to watch," he said. "No," she said. "I came to tell you something." He stepped back. She didn't go in. She stood in the doorway. "The lawyers will handle the divorce," she said. "There's nothing to contest. The prenuptial agreement is clean and your counsel knows it." She paused. "The federal case is between you and Reed. I'm not a party to it, and I'm not interested in participating beyond what I've already given." Julian's jaw moved. He looked older than last night. Not the performance of age, actual age, the kind that arrived when the structure holding a person up was removed. "That's it," he said. "That's it," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "You know it wasn't all manufactured," he said. "The beginning of it. Us." She looked at him. She thought about whether that was true and understood she would never actually know, and understood further that it didn't change anything material. "I know," she said. "It doesn't help." She left. The formal wedding was held 3 weeks later in the main room of the Sorrento estate, which had been cleared of its usual furniture and filled instead with black roses. Her choice, she'd been asked and she'd chosen them. And gold candles, which had been Matteo's suggestion delivered without explanation, and which she'd found she didn't need one for. It was not a large event. Her father stood on her left, straight-backed and careful, with Gerald Ash beside him because they had, in the weeks since, become the kind of friends that a 71-year-old man and a 60-year-old port manager became when they'd weathered something together. Sienna stood beside Marina in a dress that covered her arm, her hair done, her eyes doing the complicated thing that eyes did at weddings, even when the wedding was not uncomplicated. The Sorrento side was its own arrangement. Men who did not perform emotion, and women who had learned to read rooms, and a family structure that Marina was only beginning to understand she had married into rather than been assigned to. Matteo stood at the front of the room with the same quality of stillness he'd had on the rooftop, on the staging area, in every room she'd seen him occupy. The stillness of a man who had stopped needing external things to tell him where to stand. She walked toward him, her father's hand on her arm. She thought, "A year ago I was trying to save something that was already gone." She thought, 6 months ago Julian was building a cage and calling it protection. She thought, last night, 3 weeks ago, the night that felt like last night, I dropped a ring into a wine glass and understood for the first time that I had been waiting my entire marriage for someone to hand me permission to become what I already was. Nobody had handed it to her. She'd picked it up herself. Matteo watched her approach. When she reached him, his eyes moved over her face with the specific attention she had learned in 3 weeks of proximity was not calculation. Or not only calculation. It was the way he looked at things he was deciding how to be responsible for. They stood facing each other. The man performing the legal ceremony said the necessary words. When he reached the exchange, Matteo took her hand. Not with performance. Not with the practiced ease of a man who knew how this was supposed to look. He took her hand the way he did everything, with precision and without waste. He said the words. She said the words. There was no ring this time. They'd agreed on that. Rings were for later, if later became a thing that wanted them. Tonight was for the words. The room was quiet when the words were done. Her father made a sound. Sienna made a different sound. Someone from the Sorrento side began to clap, and then the room followed. Matteo looked at her. She looked at him. "All right," he said. "Just that." the word he used for things that had been decided and were now in motion. "All right," she said back. Later, when the room had thinned and her father had been driven home by Gerald Ash and Sienna had fallen asleep on a settee near the window, Marina stood at the edge of the room with a glass of wine she had actually drunk this time and looked at the black roses. They were losing petals. That was the thing about black roses. They were dramatic and beautiful, and they did not last, because nothing bred to be that specific and that dark held together easily. They shed their petals onto the white tablecloths in a pattern that looked almost intentional. Mateo came to stand beside her. He looked at the roses too. "My choice?" she said. "I know," he said. "They're losing petals." "They are." She looked at him sideways. "You could have said something. You chose them," he said. "They're yours to lose." Marina looked at the petals on the white cloth, dark against pale. The specific impermanence of beautiful things that were not built to be comfortable. She thought, "I am 34 years old. I have survived a man who used me as raw material. I have a father who is alive and a sister who told me the truth eventually, and a marriage that is a legal arrangement with a man I don't fully know and who does not fully know me." She thought, that is enough to begin with. The candles burned. The petals fell. The city outside went on in its indifferent and necessary way, full of people making decisions in hard moments and living with the shape of them. Marina Vale, who was also Marina Sorrento, finished her wine and set the glass down on a table that was hers now, in a house that was hers now, in a life that she had not chosen but had, at a critical moment, chosen to make. She turned away from the roses. She walked toward whatever came next.